That's the beginning of the interlude. The clarinet comes into this interlude, joins in, and slowly pulling the orchestra faster and faster and faster and faster and wilder until we get to the second cadenza. And the second cadenza has the same kind of music as the first cadenza, excepting that it is amplified to fortissimo, and it is joined with by the percussion. So you have the same run as you did before, and the same opening music there, but now we have, if you'll see the pages, all sorts of outbursts by the percussion against this cadenza. And this is the corona of the sun. This is the huge version of that tiny little section. I'll try and find it for you here, fast forward to it, and just let you hear the beginning of that. So you can hear it really is the same music, but transformed. So you can hear that as the wild version of the earlier one, and it reaches a huge peak, and the orchestra comes in, and then it all plays the opening part actually backwards until it ends just a backwards right to the first note of the piece is the last note of the first movement. Now, the second movement is a completely different thing. After all that frenetic wildness, which we needed to show the virtuosity of the soloist in the cadenzas, now is the elegy. And the elegy is, as I said, rather desolate. In fact, the word desolate is used to describe it to the players. This is partly because knowing my father, he was a very lonely man. He separated from my mother. He lived in a hotel. He only wanted to play music. He didn't have many friends, didn't read a book, do anything else but practice and play. Concertos, symphonic works, chamber music, he was there playing. Aside from that, he went out alone in a restaurant. And so the beginning of this movement, I think if you hear it, it's not just a sadness, but it's also a feeling of emptiness, because he kind of had that in his life. When he wanted to be warm to me, I would visit, because I lived more with my mother in Brooklyn, but I would visit him, and he would play a piece he was working on. He'd say, look, I'm working on this, listen to this. And he'd play me sections, said, do you like this better, or do you like this better? And that was the way he was close. So the movement has that kind of feeling, and it begins with the strings very quietly, and then the solo clarinet. I'll just play you the beginning of it. can see the mood that creates and how different it is in the first. Let me skip ahead a little bit and see if I can get the violin solo in mixed with it, so you can hear then what happens when the two of them speak to each other. After the clarinet played, it goes back to that opening feeling. Now the solo violin comes in. And then they proceed to play together for a while, and the violin, solo violin and the clarinet play the last phrase at the end of the movement. Interestingly, that's the part I wrote first in the whole concerto. After I designed all this, I went to the elegy and wrote the duet of the violin and the clarinet, and then worked backwards to the beginning of the movement, because I needed, that was the central part of it. That's what I needed. By the way, what you're hearing, although Stanley did record this commercially, as did Richard Stoltzman, for beautifully produced records, this is actually a recording of the world premiere, which is why you hear the coughs. Leonard Bernstein conducting it, because in many ways that's my favorite. And it may not be the sonically greatest one, because it was recorded on tape in 1977, but the energy and the character is so great that I'd rather play that for you than the commercial discs of it. Anyway, that ends, and now we're into the last movement. Now, I have all this stuff worked out. I've got that it's going to be a toccata, that it's antiphonal. Now what do I do next? And the answer is, how did I pick material, and what did I do to make this work? Well, this is the way my thinking went. Let me not use this until the last half of the piece. Let me start here with the idea of motion on the stage. So I can deal with stands moving a single note back and forth. I can deal with this back and forth, timpanis. I can deal with trumpet, talking clarinet, talking to trumpet, clarinet, talking to lower brass on either side. Now, what about my material? What do I use? And I said, well, one of them is I want a toccata. So I made up a toccata, and because I wanted it to be very chromatic, I used the 12-tone method in doing that, which is simply a very simple process of writing, but it can give you an infinite number of notes that are constantly changing. But if you want to sound still like you have a tonality with the 12-tone, all you have to do is repeat some of the notes more often, and you'll start to hear those as the central notes. So I did that combination of things to get an angular, wild toccata.